long, sleek, and hypersonic. The North American X-15 makes its debut in October 1958. The experimental research project belongs to NASA, the Air Force, and North American Aviation. Its purpose? To explore the very edge of space.
The X-15 program actually predates the space age. The idea was to start exploring hypersonic space. Aircraft were going supersonic. They were going Mach 2, Mach 2.5, but nothing was really going at space equivalent speeds of like Mach 25. So there was some question of like, well, what's gonna happen when we start going really, really fast?
Engineers were looking at what kind of materials can you use at extreme high speeds? How do you control a spacecraft or aircraft at those kind of speeds? And so that was the realm that the X-15 was aimed at.
The X-15 is 50 feet long, almost all of which is taken up by its fuel tank. Fully fueled, it weighs almost 38,000 pounds.
It was basically a rocket with a cockpit on the top. This thing burned through its fuel to propel the spacecraft to ridiculous speeds and heights.
The X-15's pilots are an exclusive club of just 12 daring members, including future astronaut Neil Armstrong.
They had to be able to think quickly about where they are and what's going on and what the most likely problem is they're facing at the moment, what could kill them next.
From the start of the program, it isn't clear whether pilots are testing the space rocket or it is testing them. June 8th, 1959. Edwards Air Force Base, California. The new and unproven X-15 is ready for its very first flight. NASA plans to test the space plane's handling capabilities with a long, unpowered glide back to Earth.
The X-15 is effectively a rocket-powered glider. It runs for 90 seconds, and then you're out of fuel. And the craft becomes a glider, and you come back and land. Drawback, of course, is that if you misjudge the landing, you can't take off and fly around again and land. You got to get it right the first time.
Piloting the spacecraft, legendary test pilot and aircraft engineer, Scott Crossfield.
Among some of his earliest claims to fame, he became the first pilot to fly at Mach 2, so twice the speed of sound.
The ground crew straps Crossfield's X-15 to its mothership, a modified B-52 bomber.
Because the X-15 needed to reserve all of its fuel, it was actually air-launched from underneath the wing of a B-52.
.003, Edwards, cleared for takeoff.
Crossfield was sealed inside the cockpit of the X-15 for about an hour as this bomber rose to the launch altitude.
At 37,000 feet, Crossfield gives the cue.
Release. It's a clean break.
The X-15 begins its downward glide.
Looks pretty good here. I'm at 36,000.
The first part of the flight goes smoothly.
Clean separations. Good deal, buddy. Beginning the turn in. Got plenty of room.
But as Crossfield approaches the landing, the X-15 starts bucking wildly.
The nose of the aircraft was bouncing up and down. And the more he tried to correct it, the worse it got.
The bouncing aircraft sinks toward the desert at 200 miles per hour. Observers watch in horror, wondering if the X-15's first flight may be its last.
Take it easy, McGear.
Crossfield struggles to ease the plane down to the lake bed.
About 30 feet. Now just hold her steady and you'll settle right there.
He skids for nearly 3/4 of a mile before coming to a stop. Only the landing gear is damaged. Crossfield himself emerges unscathed.
The problem turned out to be improperly set flight controls, which luckily was something that could be fixed very easily.
5 months later, Crossfield is in the cockpit again. This time, testing the X-15's powerful engine on a fully powered flight. The plan is to make a straight climb to the edge of space at 80,000 feet.
Here to go. Right. Come pilot. Launch.
Moments after freefall, Crossfield lights his engine. 13 seconds later, a warning light. The engine is on fire.
It's on fire, Scott. Like shut down. Please shut down. Shut down. Land unbroken.
Crossfield's flight plan quickly changes to one of survival. High over the Mojave Desert, X-15 pilot Scott Crossfield is in trouble. His engine fire quickly burns out, but he must make an emergency landing, forcing him to test the X-15's very bones.
The X-15 was designed to land empty. On this flight, however, Crossfield had to land with a nearly full fuel tank. The aircraft was twice as heavy as it should have been.
Crossfield fights to get the plane into the right landing position. Thousands of pounds of unspent fuel causes the X-15's fuselage to break just behind the cockpit. Crossfield is unharmed.
Pilots always said the safest place to be in any issue with the X-15 was the cockpit. It was your best defense against death.
Over the next few years, pilots undertake dozens of tests. At increasingly ambitious altitudes and speeds.
As the program progresses, the X-15 begins to be modified and flown in regimes where it is so far in the high reaches of the atmosphere that there's effectively no atmosphere. And it's really sort of like a spacecraft.
In 1962, Major Robert White flies the plane to 59 miles, literally crossing the boundary into space to become the Air Force's first winged astronaut.
If you can find a way to get yourself 50 miles above our planet, that is considered to be space, and you can get astronaut wings. And that's what he did.
In 1967, William Knight sets a record for the fastest ever piloted powered aircraft flight. 4,520 miles per hour, or Mach 6.7, a record that still stands today.
These pilots were breaking speed records and altitude records all over the place, and it was really starting to prove that humans could pilot vehicles in a near-space environment.
For 190 flights, these space pioneers dared the X-15 to get the best of them. On the 191st flight, they pushed too far. November 15th, 1967, Edwards Air Force Base, California. At 10:30 in the morning, test pilot Mike Adams takes off on his 7th X-15 flight.
He's testing out a new display in the interior of the cockpit, X-15 number 3, which was one of the ones that was most modified to change the displays to fly like a space vehicle.
At 45,000 feet, Adams drops. Seconds later, he engages his engine and finds himself piloting a rocket. His X-15 maintains a fast, steep climb, blazing upward at 4,000 feet per second. The engine gulps down 9 tons of fuel in a 90-second burn, pushing beyond the Earth's atmosphere.
Regular flight controls didn't work. He had to use really small jets that can manipulate the spacecraft with tiny bursts of gas.
At 230,000 feet up and 4,600 miles per hour, Adams suddenly loses control of his X-15.
He was actually having some faulty displays about pitch information. He ended up not realizing that his heading had gotten so far off, and that resulted in him falling into a spin.
A minute after he starts his descent, Adams realizes that he's in trouble. He radios for help. Flight controllers are stunned.
The engineers on the ground only had some of the data that was showing up in the cockpit, so they were unaware of exactly how bad the situation was getting.
At those sorts of speeds and those sorts of altitudes, things happen very fast, and it was very easy for the situation to get out of control very quickly, which is what happened.
On the ground, the control room loses contact with Adams.
At about 62,000 feet, the forces on the body of the aircraft ripped it apart.
He was killed probably instantaneously, and then the remnants of the X-15 were scattered across the desert floor.
Investigators reach a grim conclusion. Adams made the errors that caused his plane to spin.
The folks who were analyzing the accident thought that his ability to sort out what the instruments were doing was compromised by vertigo, and so they instituted a screening program after that for the X-15 pilots.
The X-15 is known to be a risky beast, but it's always brought its pilots back alive. Until now.
They knew that the margins for error were extremely small, and that even little glitches can cascade into a position where in a very short period of time you can find yourself in an unrecoverable position.
But in October 1968, a little over a year after Adams' death, NASA shuts down the X-15 program for good.
The X-15 was the vehicle that paved the way in our understanding so that we could fly from orbit down to the Earth or from the Earth into space with a winged vehicle.